Now, the museum, should they take up an offer to display Britain's first female Prime Minister's clothes?
I think they've been a bit short-sighted on this one. I'm not, and never was, a huge fan of the lady, but I think on this occasion they've really blown it. I think they've shown themselves to be rather snobbish. I think she wasn't cool. And yet, she was a style icon. It happened to be the style of Middle England, but there's nothing on, if you're going to talk about technical ability, which the V&A did, and talk about aesthetic, it has to be aesthetically pleasing. Well, there's nothing wrong with a Winsmore suit or a Jaeger suit. They'll last forever. And quite a lot of what they call high fashion, which I've looked at quite carefully, doesn't even have a lining. It wouldn't pass my Jewish grandmother, I can tell you that.
So you think there was an aesthetic and a historic reason for a museum to take it?
Absolutely. When she first came along, Maggie Thatcher, she had little sort of blousy dresses and sort of frizzy hair, and she knew that in a man's world she really had to get her act together, and she found a carapace actually which was just as much of a shield as Queen Elizabeth's ruff. She did actually wear a ruff one night at the Guildhall, you know. So
I remember that. She did look a little bit like Queen Elizabeth I.
She did, and you know, I'm sure that she didn't have a mother who kind of guided her sartorially. But I bet you any money her dad, Councillor Roberts, frequently said, "The clothes maketh the man."
And there is a special interest being our first and so far only female Prime Minister, because the clothes of male politicians are quite dull, really. They're quite unpredictable.
Fabulous, fabulous exhibition with John Major's suits all lined up, wouldn't it? Yeah. I mean, we know that it's ridiculous to judge people by their clothes, but actually she got that decision out the way. And what's really interesting is that they're dismissive about her as a fashion icon, but yet if you go into any high street, if you go into Cos or Reese or any of these high street shops, what will you see? You'll see ungiving fabrics, pussycat bows, supposed to be ironic, but it is still the same thing. And the other thing is, and handbags. Ruddy handbags everywhere, £8,000. She started the handbag. Before that, it was just a place to put your Valium.
The point that neither of you has made yet, although I think you're hinting at it, is she used clothes as an instrument of power.
Yeah.
She expressed power through her clothing.
Yeah.
And that is why the V&A judgment, I think, is very doubtful, because it isn't about fashion, it isn't about the quality of the clothes. It is a historic moment in which a woman becomes Prime Minister and uses the clothing to advance her political power.
Yeah.
And her clothing changed as she herself felt more powerful. As Maureen says, it was quite a... You see the pictures of her in the 70s as leader of the opposition. It was quite kind
Sort
of
of
dowdy stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then you see the padded shoulders, and I think it was Jaeger and Aquascutum and so on. I should on the BBC say other jackets are available on that. And she began to... The clothes almost began to reflect her own sense of power and importance.
And Dynasty was on, and people wore big shoulders.
Clothes do.
Yeah.
I came in as a supporter of the V&A, but I would never contradict Maureen. She comes from Hull anyway, so you've convinced me. You've convinced me.
I see. Yeah. And it was a conscious attempt to... that's why it's interesting that, in a sense, for the V&A, it was a conscious attempt, and therefore has some historic value.
Exactly, it has a historic value. And I mean,
social.
just things like the examples we haven't mentioned yet. The outfit she wore in that tank with the great swirling veil around her head. The outfit that she wore in Moscow in 1987 when she was mobbed by what was then people in the Soviet Union a month and a half before the general election in this country. And she was wearing that great big coat with the great big furry lapels and the fur hat. All absolutely planned, iconic images that reflected back to Britain and said, my goodness, this is the woman we're going to vote for.
So
they didn't like her at the V&A. I'm sure they want McQueen and they want Bowie, because then they get a cool audience in. They're not going to be queuing round the block to see Maggie's clothes, frankly.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think it is a bit of Oxford University Mark II. You remember Oxford?
Oh,
Yeah.
we can give
I
her
was
a
just thinking
Johnson.
about that. Yeah, I was just thinking
This
about
is a Greek tragedy.
When you were
Thatcher.
playing Mrs. T, the clothes must have been an important part of getting the character right. So style and substance, actually, are not two separate things, I would suggest. They can
as
they
an
reflect
actor,
each other.
as one of the reasons I disliked her, and I dislike her less now than I did, was because she was such a bad actress, such a hammy.